Welcome to the NACE Town Hall, Impact of COVID-19 on the Future of the Profession. Today's session is being brought to you by HireVue. HireVue is the global leader in video interviewing and interview assessments. Their enterprise-grade platform provides a faster and equitable way to evaluate talent. HireVue supports over 1 million graduate interviews annually and has solutions for campus teams. HireVue has hosted almost 15 million interviews for its 700 plus customers. It is my pleasure to turn the session over to today's moderator and NACE Executive Director, Sean Vanderzeel.
Good afternoon or good morning, depending upon where you're dialing in from today. It's great to have everyone joining us for this fifth in a series of town halls that we are hosting. And what I'd like to do before we get started is to give you the order of the day. So I'm going to start out by providing us with a knowledge base of our recent quick polls that we've been taking at NACE and provide you with a few statistics so you know the direction that our world is moving in from our profession. And once I've done that, we're going to turn things over to our panelists. I'll have a few questions for our panelists to get us thinking. And then once we've done that, probably after about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, we will turn it over to audience questions. So that'll be towards the bottom of the hour. And there'll be plenty of time for questions, and we'll keep track of the questions that you're asking. To interact with us or to ask questions, you can use two of the features here that are part of Zoom. And that is the Q&A feature. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen, or the chat feature. And we'll be keeping track of those questions as we go through today. You can see and hear us. We cannot see or hear you. So that's the importance of using the chat features that are available. So I'd like to, again, ground us in where we're at. We've been doing some quick polls, and they've been very helpful in providing insights on the direction of college recruiting. On the employer side, we've had just over 350 of our employer members respond to the survey. And the good news is that 59% of those just over 350, 59% are not revoking any offers right now. So it's any type of offer. They're not revoking any offers, though 22% are still considering it. So there are people that are still waiting things out, trying to understand where things are going. So that could be full-time hires or it could be interns. We have about 19% of our employers, of those just over 350, who are revoking offers to interns. So it's about 20% that have revocation of internships. And only 3.5% are revoking offers to full-time recruits. 42% of our employers that were responded are moving their internship programs virtual, and 40% are reducing the length of the internships by shortening or delaying the start date for what happens. And many of them are doing a combination of things, right? So they're doing virtual and they're shortening the length of the internship. Another good news item is that our employers remain pretty optimistic that their recruiting for the class of 2021, it will hold steady for the most part, and that was about 64% of them. So meaning that compared to the class of 2020, about 64% of them are thinking it's going to be about the same for the class of 2021. Now that's where things stand today. Of course, a lot could change from now until next year. If we turn to some of the college statistics, career centers, 99% of our career centers are doing most everything virtually. And when we look at, we've asked questions around career fairs, and we've asked if they're gonna be holding career fairs on campus this coming fall. 28% of those campuses have reported that they will hold on-campus career fairs, or that they are planning to, at least at this point. We've also found that 7.8% of our colleges, and this was of close to 750 college members, so 750 college members, 7.8% basically have said that they're only going to hold virtual career fairs. So that's inching up to the 8% mark where they'll only do virtual. And only 5% of career centers plan to facilitate on-campus student interviews with employers, while 26% plan to rely only on virtual platforms, and 40% plan to do both. So hopefully that gives you just a little bit of background where we're at. To find those statistics, we'll post those links. Look out for Meredith and Aaron, who are posting those links in the chat box so you can see where those are. We'll finalize those polls this week, and so you'll see the final stats as we close out this quick poll. And we'll have, starting next week, another quick poll that will start up on another set of questions. So through our town halls, we've had an evolution of the kinds of topics that we've covered, from helping everyone to kind of get into the day-to-day and new realities of doing recruiting and career center services online. And we've spoken about those issues at length. Our last session, we talked about how people are planning for the fall and the kinds of things that they're putting into their consideration for that planning. And this session, what we thought we would do is to talk a little bit more about the future. So when I say future, it's the short-term future. And what we're really talking about is from that next winter, summer, the following fall, so over the next year or so, what are the kinds of things that our panelists and what are folks thinking about as they plan for those future states? What are the things that they're taking into consideration, all based upon what's happened in today's context? So what are those things that have propelled us and accelerated or decelerated from the things that have happened around us over the past few weeks? I want to make sure that everyone understands who our panelists are, and a way to do that is just to have them each answer for us just how COVID and how this virtual world has impacted them, their campuses, and their employers and the work that they do. So I would love for each of our panelists to just take 2 minutes to explain to us kind of your current state based upon the world. So that'll give us a nice base. And I'll start with Maura.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Maura Quinn, and I manage our early talent programs at Liberty Mutual Insurance. I'm based in Boston. As many of you are figuring out how we work virtually, you can tell today I'm based in my bedroom. So talk about bringing your whole self to work. So our program, we have about 700 summer interns, about 600 undergrad and 100 MBA students, law clerks, and data science PhDs. Our program is, it's virtually, well, I guess essentially it's not changed. We will continue as planned. Part of our program has always been virtual. To make sure that we engage with our remote interns that are not in one of our large offices. So no change to start dates. The biggest challenge we've been dealing with is technology and finding computers with things on back order. But happy to talk through some of those things, and just so excited that we were able to honor those commitments to your students.
Great, thank you. Brian.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Guerrero, and I lead and guide the Center for Career and Professional Success here at The Ohio State University and the Arts and Sciences College. Gosh, similar to, I'm sure, many of us around this virtual table, there has been such a significant amount of change management, both at the institution that I serve and in particular in my department. I would say, if I were to describe back and reflect on kind of what's been immediate and where we're moving, is going from very tactical or operational decision making to getting back to our core vision, and really trying to think about the impact and the value proposition that we have on our campus and what value we can provide to folks like Maura and Sean on this call. I think one of the things that I've been really excited about is seeing how our profession is responding and being responsive to such a change. So I'm excited to see where it goes. I would say, if I were to describe kind of what's been happening most recently on our campus has been both fascinating and fatiguing at the same time, but a real opportunity to create structures to support our students and candidates alike.
Great, thank you, Brian. I really appreciate that. Norma.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be with you. I'm Norma Jo Dyer, and I serve as the Executive Director for Texas Career Engagement at the University of Texas at Austin. Just to put in context a little bit, our office, Texas Career Engagement, has been on the UT campus for a little over a year. And it really was created based on an identified need on our campus to ensure that we are providing equitable access to anything career for our students, and also to provide equitable access for our employers to diverse talent across our campus. At UT, we have 18 career centers. They do a phenomenal job serving the needs of their units. And our office is an overarching approach to look at strategy for engagement. I can't think of a more important time than today to really hone in and focus on that equitable access. As we work with our students, you know, what has changed and how we're looking at things differently. To answer Sean's question is, I really see this as an opportunity to rethink, reimagine, and find opportunities for different ways of serving our students and our employers. And I'll share more about that in a little bit, but that's really, I think, has been the pivotal change on our campus, is just reimagining our work. And what an amazing opportunity amidst all of this.
And Sean.
Thanks, Sean. So this is Sean Treccia from KPMG. We're a public accounting and consulting firm. I'm based in our Chicago office. My day job is leading our global recruiting programs for the firm. For us, there were two major changes that we had to implement, because when we stopped pretty much going to campus or even going in the office in mid to late March, we had finished our on-campus recruiting, but we were still going through what would be our office visit time. So one shift was changing those office visits from live visits across our 85 offices in the US to virtual visits. So we put together a small planning team that developed, worked with outside vendors and some internal solutions to roll out virtual versions of our office visit program. The second thing we were doing is changing for the internship. So our interns are client service based. So we have about 2,500 based across the whole US in those 85 offices, and they spend their time working at client locations, supervised by someone with a few years experience. We can't go to client locations right now because our offices are closed, most of our clients are closed. So the challenge is, how do you create work for them? Because most of our work is regulated by the federal government too, we can't have them doing client-related work that isn't supervised, and not at the intern level. They just don't have the experience for that. So we have shifted. While we haven't cut the internship, we did reduce it significantly from a 10-week internship down to a 2-week, or I should say 80-hour internship spread over 4 weeks. But I am co-leading a group that is developing what will be done during those 80 hours. None of it can be client service related because of the regulations, but it's going to be different training, development, networking, and other connectivity activities. So we are going to keep them somewhat busy, but we did it with the idea being that they can do it virtually at any time, any place, if they do have another job during the summer that they want to do. And we are still paying them, although not for the full 10 weeks, but for the 80 hours, the 2-week equivalent.
Great, very helpful. So you can see we have a range of activities that are happening, some that have remained pretty consistent over time, and others that have changed pretty dramatically. So I think we have some good perspective here in our town hall with our panelists. And what I'd like to do now is to just have each of you think about the impacts of the last 6 weeks and how it's really changed our world and what lasting impacts these changes will have, and what that means for our future. And so I'd like to ask you each some pointed questions related to that. And I'll start with Sean. There are, we think about population shifts in addition to changing employer priorities and the impacts of COVID. Can you help us understand how you are thinking about redesigning or modifying your talent acquisition strategies over the next year?
Sure, great question. And some of our changes that we're making are just happenstance that won't be ones that we were working on for a while. One of the other parts of my day job is co-leading a project to move to a more virtual recruiting process at some of our universities. And that was started over a year ago before the virus really was known. So our big shift is looking at an organization that traditionally has had to do everything in person. We had 350 schools across the US where we actively recruited, many of whom we hired 0 or 1 person over the course of 2 or 3 years. And so trying to look at that and say, do we really need to physically be at those schools? That's a lot of money to go to many of them. That's a lot of time. I mentioned earlier, we're a client service business. So when our client service people are on campus, they're not charging time to clients. So then we are not making money as a firm. So really trying to look at how we can adjust to a more virtual atmosphere. This virus has caused us to do some of that sooner. And I think what has been beneficial from an internal standpoint is getting our professionals to realize that some of this can be done virtual. So for example, what we are looking to do going forward is say, instead of going to 350 schools, can we cut that down to 200 schools? Meaning we would still recruit at all different schools, but we would only physically be active at 200. It allows us to focus more and spend more time and effort there. The other big change is moving to an open application. We do not have an open application right now. You can only apply, students can only apply for a KPMG internship or entry-level position through the job postings we do at those 350 specific universities. That has really limited the diversity of our pool. We really want a much more diverse pool, but balance that with how you manage the volume given our regulations that we are under. So we are doing several things such as implementing assessment testing, these virtual events and other things as a way to open our application to all students from around the world, like and most other companies have been doing for years, put it on our website, but to still make that personal connection, because as a business, we don't produce anything. We're a professional services business. So people who join us usually join because of the people they meet. It's not the product they're going to produce, because we don't produce a product. So we still need to manage that personal connection. So a combination of putting more effort at the larger schools to get a better return on investment, but still getting that personal interaction, although it will be virtual, from the smaller schools. And I think these last few weeks have shown us that we can still make some of those strong interactions on a virtual level. They're never going to be the same as live, we know that, but nobody has unlimited time or resources. And this has helped us show that it can really work.
Great, thank you, Sean. That was very helpful. I'd like to ask a question of Brian. I'd like to focus on underserved students and thinking about the future. This COVID has certainly illuminated and highlighted inequities in our systems that already existed, but were exacerbated with the situation. And I'd love to, and I'm sure our audience would love to hear what you're thinking, what the future holds related to these students and how things may change or how you'd like to see them change.
Thanks, Sean, and thanks for acknowledging that some of these things have been historical in nature. I think it would be remiss, not to acknowledge how this pandemic has impacted our Black and Brown Americans, our Native and Navajo nations, and even to some degree, I've been thinking about some of the anti-Asian American or Asian sentiments that some of our candidates or students are experiencing. So this is one piece of the pie, which is higher education and working with employers, right? But it's compounded. And I think we can all acknowledge that, there are other factors that play into this, such as, limiting healthcare, perhaps even instability in terms of financial wellness or food insecurity. So that's kind of where my thinking has been. It's like, I keep on thinking, gosh, we need to not just be career services, but advocates, even more so during this time, and to raise those narratives to campus partners who truly believe in it and some who still need to want to embrace it. So I think that that's going to be important moving forward. I also have been thinking through some of the more digital divide based on just how we've moved to this type of synchronous, asynchronous learning. And at Ohio State, we're at a very privileged campus where, even preceding my time, we're known as the digital flagship campus. It was a partnership with Apple where all of our students get an iPad. And so, based on the great work around this campus and advocates around there, career resources are amplified in key places within that technology intervention. I think the other thing I've been thinking about is how do we work with, local service providers, as many of us have been, to ensure that connectivity, things that are very basic to some of us in terms of internet access, that our students get that. And I know that a number of our campuses have moved long-term in that direction. But all this to say, if you're thinking about the long-term, I'm not sure would be surprising to most of us that have done this work for quite some time. But the long-term is really about building trusting relationships with diverse student populations. And how you do that is, this is just one opinion, is with and for them, with campus partners and other people that I kind of call it in your own council, if you will, because these students go to those influencers in a way that maybe if they're just hearing from career services for the first time, they may not necessarily see that as that trusted advisor. So that is particularly a really strong thing. And the other thing I would say, and I worry about this a little bit, certainly won't happen in my organization, but when we think about resource allocation, especially during times of constraint, I think a lot of us are going to look at our budgets, and sometimes, not all the time, people will look at things like professional development. They might look at diversity initiatives, and they might say to themselves, we're not getting the same type of engagement. We're not getting the attendance numbers. Maybe we should do a rethink on that. I would say this is the time to invest your resources to bridge the gap. So don't pull away from that. I would say that's the long-term thing for me when it comes to connecting with these students.
Thank you. That was very helpful information and sentiments that you shared, Brian. I'd like to go back to an employer perspective. We're going to cover a few different topics and we'll bring all this back together, everyone. So just wanted to throw out like 3 or 4 big topics and then we can bring this all back together. I'd like to go over to Maura. And Maura, so we talk about this competency gap that's happening out there from what companies are expecting, what might be being delivered from a higher education perspective. And you've got a lot of things happening in your talent acquisition lifecycle and needs of your organization. How are you partnering, or how are you influencing curriculum, or are you thinking about that for the future? How might things change for you going forward?
Sure. So this is actually, it's not new to Liberty. Being an insurance company, we certainly have all the core functions that a large organization has in terms of our development programs, finance and accounting, HR, technology. But because of the volume with which we hire, and we're based in Boston, which obviously we have great schools around us, but we were noticing gaps in some of our opportunities. And so for 2 reasons, we've actually started partnering with several of our local colleges and local, I say Boston, but certainly I'll go into it a little bit more, where we have large offices and we know what our skills need is. So we're partnering with faculty to actually help either retool or, revamp their curriculum in certain areas. So for instance, at UMass Boston and UMass Lowell, we're starting to implement data science as a major in the undergraduate degree. 10 years ago, that was us at Bentley implementing an actuarial science program, right? So things have shifted and our skills have shifted. So, but that also helps us with sourcing and recruiting more students of color. When we think about some of those larger schools that are in our backyard, their percentage of underrepresented students is much higher in some than in some other schools. And so that's another way for us to attract first gen students. We work with the Office of Student Disabilities, and then, you know, certainly the multicultural centers at these schools. And so that's actually helped us. And over the last year, we've seen our numbers increase in those areas for hiring students. And, you know, so that's one of the biggest things. We've also expanded. We have a large headquarters in Plano, Texas. So we were working, and similarly in Boston, we're working with community college to create an insurance curriculum. So folks that would go directly into like a claims or an underwriting opportunity within our, you know, either personal or commercial lines business, because we saw a gap there in the need for talent to really, you know, grow in that particular location. So those are some of the things that we've been doing. And so not only does it help us with the right skills that we need in the organization, but also expanding our underrepresented talent pool, which we know as a Boston-based insurance company, that's our #1 priority.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah,
Norma, I'd like to ask you the other side of that question. You know, being on a campus, being a career services leader, how are you addressing some of these competency issues on your campus going forward into the future? What do you foresee?
Yeah, it really is an important question, and I think we would be remiss if we didn't take a giant step back and look at a bird's eye view of what is happening in our day-to-day, and looking to our future, what we can anticipate. I think one of the best questions we can all ask ourselves is, what will this experience teach us, particularly our students, in the areas of competencies? How will the NACE career readiness competencies shift? What will employers truly appreciate moving forward? And so we're thinking about those things on our campus. We were really sad that UT was so excited to host the Career Competency Symposium that was to take place next month. It's not going to happen yet. It will happen though, and there will be some virtual engagement as well. So those of you who might be looking for that. But I think the important piece here is to look at how can we collaborate and partner with our campus partners to ensure that we are all on the same page on the relevancy of these competencies. And so we are doing a few different things on our campus. One of the first things, though, that we proactively did with our faculty in particularly was to extend a hand to them to offer them some resources so that as they think about, for example, those spring internships that were unexpectedly halted after March 13th, that we gave them some alternative assignments to incorporate some thinking around career readiness competencies and how students can reflect on what they're learning, what they have learned, and what they hope to learn moving forward. We're also creating teaching tools in our Canvas portal for faculty to access, and we're partnering with our Faculty Innovation Center, with our Experiential Learning Initiative at UT. I'm sure those of you on campuses have similar entities that you can partner with. And we are getting ready to launch a university-wide task force. As you can imagine, there are many task forces that are launching right now to address the imminent needs that lay in front of us. But we're looking at one that will help us to think differently. And we're calling it the Career Experiences and Success Reimagined Task Force. And we're looking at incorporating creative and innovative modalities of learning, whether it's holistically experiential learning, project-based learning, and preparing our students for success beyond their degree. We're also going to continue to create alternative approaches for our faculty to rethink those learning outcomes, which then become those career readiness competencies that our students need to hone during this process. And in particular, I think, right now, as we look at our graduates, or soon-to-be graduates, and the fact that we need to not forget to celebrate them, and celebrating them in a way that acknowledges what they've done, acknowledges the fact that they are going through some incredible resiliency testing right now. That's an amazing competency that I think we can really help our students and soon-to-be graduates champion in the eyes of our employers. So looking at what we're calling Texas 20 and beyond, and we're going to call out 5 different areas. We're going to provide access to resources and programming and celebrations for our students around strength and resiliency, around the virtual career resources that they so desperately need, particularly today, an awareness of financial wellness and literacy. And again, partnering across campus with our financial aid office is a great way to do that. And most importantly, looking at who's hiring. Many of us have seen so many lists out there of who's hiring and who's holding off for now. But that building new skills for a new economy is probably the biggest focus for that particular effort that we are launching. And the competency integration and awareness is going to be so vital as we extend information and easy resources to access, not only for our students and graduates, but also for our faculty and staff. So lots to unpack there, but really all of that points to what we all need to be doing to best serve our future workforce.
Thank you, Norma. We have a gazillion questions from our audience that I'd love to get to. But before we do that, I just want to make sure if there's anything that the panelists want, if there was anything you wanted to address that another panelist said or that you wanted to add on to that you thought was important before we move on. Good. All right. So one of the first questions we got was around, Bill O'Connor had asked, do you expect spring 20 students who were not able to be hired due to COVID-19 to transition their job search to fall 20? How many of those students are there? So is there any sense of that any of you have that you might be able to help?
I could get started. I don't have a particular percentage, if you will. I only have anecdotal information based on our strong partnerships with academic advising and other colleagues. But I would say that, I think we're all kind of concerned that some of our graduating seniors might be wanting to extend for a variety of reasons, whether that's family reasons, just the delay because of what's happening in the market or perceived delay in certain markets. So I think the way we're kind of thinking about this for graduating seniors that actually do want to extend is coming at it from a kind of training, retraining perspective. It's more of like, what are you doing during this time to help you remain competitive and fresh? Are there independent projects? Are there real life simulations? There's many, I've seen a lot of things in the NACE communities, among other kinds of resources out there that are really highlighting how someone, in particular our seniors now, are handling it. So I don't have a percentage, unfortunately, but that's kind of my initial thinking about where our seniors are right now and what we have been either experiencing or telling them.
Okay, great. Sean Mora, there's a question around how do you think career services can help you as you transition to a more hybrid virtual model? So the balance between in-person and virtual, are there specific things that would be helpful for career services to do or in working with you that you'd like to throw out there for the future?
Mara, you want to go first or?
Sure, absolutely. I think just, being technology ready is going to be the most helpful thing. I mean, we certainly want to be back on campus this fall, but I'm not anticipating that we will, nor do I know yet, if our leadership, will allow travel like that. And if people are going to be comfortable standing at a career fair. I don't see it happening this fall. So we're already planning to continue, to recruit virtually. I think one of the things, I know many of your institutions have very strict guidelines on offer acceptance deadlines. That might be something that, you can help us out with. Knowing the percentage of our interns who would accept an offer early is always helpful for an organization. So I would say, maybe we might need to think about relaxing some of those deadlines. And, that might help your students too, that don't have to be stuck or tied to that deadline, and knowing that they can accept the job offer and feel, comfortable in the midst of all of this. But I do think, there's a lot of technology that's out there now, and both universities and employers need to be doing the research and going out to request, proposals from some of these vendors to, to really support a fully virtual experience, a quality virtual experience. We're going through that right now at Liberty. I'm trying to pull up the slides from the last tech update, and I'm happy to put in the chat. I mean, I'm not supporting any particular vendor. I'm just going to share with you the ones that we're looking into. We haven't made a decision yet, but that, it might help you all as you start to search for what's the best technology out there to get, ramped up and be prepared if that's the way things need to go in the fall.
Great. There's a question around for our career services folks around those students who have already graduated and extending services to them. Are you extending services to more graduates, and do you see that as a service on an ongoing basis that maybe you didn't traditionally do, or maybe you're already doing it? Could you speak to that?
Sure, I'll jump
Norma?
in, Sean.
Right.
So at UT, I mentioned each college and school has their own career center, and they all have their own policies around how they serve their alums. Some of the colleges and schools have formal alumni offices that serve alumni in very different ways. We also have a broader Texas Exes Alumni Association that we partner with. Our office, because we are so new and really we're just getting set up, we don't even have our permanent space yet on campus. We're kind of located now virtually, but before this in 3 different buildings across campus. What we have decided to do is to manage the need as much as we can, recognizing the fact that we were really created for that equitable access. And if our alums are seeking assistance in our recent grads, we are going to do all we can. Intentionally though, what we are doing is partnering with our Texas Exes Alumni Association, and we are fast tracking a mentoring platform and creating career communities so that we can serve the needs of our students and our graduates, whether they graduated last year or 10 years ago. The commitment from the institution is to ensure that Longhorns take care of Longhorns across the 40 acres and beyond. And that fast tracking has enabled us to be able to launch this platform in time for graduation this year. And so we'll be engaging in a big campaign to serve our alumni. Again, those recent and those that are more seasoned.
That's great, thank you. As you can imagine, we have a ton of questions around the virtual environment and changes that are happening or may continue to happen. So I have some specific things I'm going to try and throw off at each of you. So for the employers, I'll throw it to Sean first here. There have been a number of questions around like your knowing that things are moving a little bit more virtual and that, you know, that's a direction that you're headed in. How does that impact your recruitment cycle? How does that impact your timelines? How does it impact what what we'll see from you? Is it the traditional timing of the year? Is it et cetera, et cetera? What are you foreseeing for the future?
It's a great question. And for us, I don't know if this is the same as other people, but because we're moving to an open application, that's impacting our timeline too. So while we would traditionally be on campus in September, at schools in the Southeast, it starts as early as mid-August, and at schools in some of the Pacific ones don't start till late September because they're quarter schools. So as we go to more virtual things, we're going, because they could be open to people from anywhere around the country, we're going to have to change some of our deadlines. And that's one of the things we are adjusting to basically say, in the fall, for example, we'll have 2 deadlines for people to apply because we can't make it so early that it's just perfect for the schools like Georgia or Tennessee or those in the Southeast, because then University of Washington doesn't go back for another month. We can't also wait until mid-October for University of Washington because then all the Georgia students will have been hired. And I'm just throwing out those schools as examples. I don't know the exact dates. But so what we are trying to do is build a process that allows for students to have a reasonable time frame regardless of where they're going. But there will have to be an understanding from the student standpoint and from the Career Center standpoint and from our standpoint as recruiters on campus to say, if you go to University of Washington and your school doesn't start, for example, until September 25th, and you traditionally attended a career fair on October 1st, and you want to apply for our Atlanta office, their positions may be filled. Right now, you'll be able to apply for them. They're all posted. But if you wait until school starts, Atlanta's not going to sit around and wait 8 weeks because the odds of them getting students, for example, from University of Washington are pretty slim. Most of theirs are going to come from the Atlanta, Georgia, Southeast area. So that's the adjustment we're going to have to make, is really trying to inform students that the traditional career fairs are still great ways to meet some of the people you want to meet from your local offices. But if you want different offices, those offices may be on some different time frames. And it may mean applying for jobs before you're back in school or waiting a little longer because the office you want isn't ready to make decisions because most of their schools have not made decisions yet. So it's a challenge we face going to a full national open application and having 85 offices across the country.
Yeah, wow, interesting.
Yeah.
I want to piggyback off that, Maura, for you, because there was another question related to this kind of idea of, you know, opening applications up in a different way, and perhaps the virtual provides an opportunity. So there was a comment and question around, do you think that with the virtual environment, will be a move away from target schools at all? And will there be more ability for smaller schools, as an example, to be brought into the fold?
Yeah, so great question. And so this, for Liberty, we've been on this journey for about 2 years now. And I'm not sure if anyone, this is public information, so I'm not giving anything away. I'm not sure if anyone from Unilever is on the call, but it goes back to when Unilever, you know, really made a big leap in the virtual space for campus recruiting to reduce expenses and reduce headcount essentially, and move to a virtual recruiting technique. I, at the time, had a very progressive, innovative leader that I reported into, and he said, if Unilever can do it, why can't Liberty Mutual? You know, go figure this out for us. And luckily, I came up with a nice combination, and you know, and so we moved away from what was typically a target school. You know, we basically had 50 schools in our portfolio, and then probably another 100 that folks in the business, you know, might be in their backyard, and they would show up, and we would kind of find out later. But those 50 schools, you know, really gave us about 70% of our hires. Now we look at target sources. So our footprint has reduced to, it's probably still close to 50 schools, but that's more of our business partners that are going. There's only 20 schools in the undergrad space that we are still seeing significant double-digit hires. But that has allowed us, so we don't report anymore on, you know, we have to get 70% of our hires from these 50 schools because we're spending all the money there. So what we report on now is target sources, right? So anywhere where we're spending dollars, and that can be our Handshake platform where we can reach students at 800 schools now. That's our national partnership organizations where, you know, we spend money to sponsor those programs. It doesn't matter what school people go to. You know, we can find great candidates at any school. So it does open up a lot more opportunities for students who are interested in Liberty Mutual, where, you know, years ago, based on some antiquated thinking of some of our senior leaders, I'm just going to throw it out there. I won't name anyone because this is being recorded, you know, but I mean, it was still that old school sort of, well, I went to Providence College, so we have to go to Providence College. And it's like, well, Providence College, it's an amazing school, right? But I have 10 Providence colleges right in the backyard in Boston, right? And so we're not seeing the diversity that we needed to see. And so this has just, you know, moving some of our components virtually, shifting our thought process to target sources versus target schools. We really have created a lot more diversity in our programs, in our hiring. So yeah, so those small schools out there who have always invited us to your campus, we are absolutely recruiting your students. We're just doing it virtually.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And continuing on this virtual theme and turning over to Brian and Norma, we'd love to just hear around these virtual events that you're thinking may happen going forward and how things may change, particularly from a revenue standpoint. So traditionally, college career fairs have brought in significant dollars to certain campuses. I'm wondering if that's an impact for you going forward, if you're thinking about that and what that transition to a virtual event may be like for you on an ongoing basis.
Sure, I'm happy
Brian?
to jump in.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it certainly does play a role here at Ohio State. But at the same time, I think where my mindset is right now is to put that off to the side. That is a great benefit. But what's even more important is kind of what we've been talking about threaded throughout this entire discussion, which is how can we equalize the opportunity for students across the board. And so we'll have to do some assessments on the market. I think there are regional considerations that you'll have to do, national considerations. But at the same time, as we've heard from some of our colleagues here, there's a rethink about whether or not, you know, that's going to be, you know, all of us are going to be under constraints. So I think it's kind of this interesting domino effect. I think the only other thing I want to add in relation to virtual is I think we can all kind of imagine you know, all of us are talking about virtual career fairs. Okay, that's great. And we can kind of think through 100% virtual or 100% in person. I've been really kind of talking with colleagues and also my staff about really trying to be successful in the middle. That same thing that I was talking about earlier about that hybrid model, trying to think about how can we still create an environment in that so that students can still experience the organizational culture of these people who are hiring. Because at the end of the day, if it's virtual 100%, the biggest, I think, miss for some of us will be whether or not the experiences that we're providing to these candidates or these students still give them a sense about whether or not it's a good fit for them. And so how can you still convey organizational culture that's so important through these virtual means? I think that is something that kind of ruminates in my head. And there was a previous town hall where one of the panelists had kind of did a call out to the Department of State, who has historically done terrific virtual experiences. And so we went on a fact-finding expedition. Our employer relations group sat down with Lou Mentor, who's the, let me get this right, Northern Central Region diplomat in residence, and he gave us some really great insights. And really, what it was about was go back to your core culture. What is it that what is it that you want your candidates to be able to experience? And certainly for the Department of State, a lot of it really threaded through mentoring, very discrete projects with foreign service officers that are still very high touch, even if it is virtual in nature. So kind of went in different directions there, but that's kind of what I've been thinking about when it comes to revenue sources. Certainly it'll be an impact, but we're going to have to create opportunities for our students regardless of the revenue.
And I want to stick on the opportunity question for a second. I'm going to come to you, Norma, to ask you particularly about your rural students and some of the things that you're doing around the equity. And I also want to ask our employers similar questions related to this. We're getting lots of questions, but before we go there, one last question on the career fairs for the employers on the line, which is a couple of people have asked, will you pay to be a participant in virtual fairs as an example? Is that something you're willing to do? What does that look like for you?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, oh, Sean, go ahead. You want to?
Okay. I'll start. Yeah, we would. The question, and this just came up on one of our calls yesterday, I don't know which school it was, but asked for a fee of $5,000 to participate in a event they were moving from physical to virtual. And they, in past years, they said the $5,000 was to cover room and board for the students and meals. We went back and said we would be willing to pay like we have in past years, but not $5,000 because you're eliminating room and board, meals and that. So it just, from a business standpoint, it doesn't make sense. I know sometimes there's a feeling that we have tons of money, but our budgets are being cut too. So we would be willing to pay for schools where we've paid before. I'll speak for KPMG. I'm not speaking for every employer, but for KPMG, we'd be willing to pay for schools we've paid before at reasonable amounts. I think just like we have to justify to our clients, if we go to a client and say, pay us the same, and we're going to do less or provide you with less, a client's going to say, no, we're not going to do that. So if a school's going to say, we're going to provide you access to our students virtually, but you won't get to meet any of them live, it doesn't make sense from a business standpoint to pay the same.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so
Wow.
I would just echo. So some of the big challenges we had this year, or over the last couple months in managing through this with some of our national partners. So there are a handful of events. I think it's 6 total where we're spending upwards of $50,000 on. And, for those organizations, we said, hey, we got to talk about this, right? Because it's not going to be the same experience if we're not there for 3 days with our people and our advertising and all of that. Like, it really shouldn't cost us $75,000 to attend something. So in those instances, we're working with those organizations. In the school space, I mean, I agree with Sean, but as things are moving to virtual, I mean, this is a year that we're going to support our schools. That's just the stance that we've taken on it. We still need to recruit your students. Do I want to spend $5,000 on a virtual career fair? No, but if you charge me the $700 that you were going to charge me in a typical career fair, then yeah, we're going to step up and we're going to pay that. Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you. Norma, so I just want to go back to the equity question and then go back to the employers and the same thing, which is for those students, particularly, if we remain in a virtual environment a little bit longer, or if more services are offered virtually, or if more employment opportunities or the cycle of recruitment is done more virtually, what about those students who don't have quite the same access? And how would you address that from a career center perspective?
Sure, and I think this very much is a macro issue, and it really gets at the conversations that are happening on many of our campuses, it really across the board. At UT, we engaged in a pretty successful campaign to secure funding for students for emergency funds, and much of the funding was utilized so that students could have the technology tools that they needed in order to keep learning and engaging. And I think that we need to be the strong advocates that we already are, but even more so to get front and center to say, learning doesn't just happen in a formal way through classroom learning, but it happens through experiential learning and through many of the career experiences that could potentially be compromised, particularly for our rural students. What we're seeing, and you know, we kind of looked at what is already happening at UT, where we could perhaps lean in and lend a hand, learn from, and expand. And one of our programs, it's not a program that belongs to our office. It originated through our IC Squared Institute, which is a think and do tank at UT. And they have a program called Home to Texas. And it is an opportunity for rural students to engage in internship experiences during the summer and work with local entities, maybe even local government. And they are provided a stipend, so we raise funds for that. We are looking at how we can expand those experiences for our rural students and also for those organizations, those small to medium-sized organizations that could really use a hand at this time. So that's one example on how we can do this. Overarchingly though, we will be the best advocates for our students on this access point. And we need to make sure that we are sitting at the table, that our administration on our campuses know the value in these experiences. And much of that comes from our employer voices that we are able to pass along. So, you know, Sean and Maura, the work that you do and the testimonies that you offer to our campuses is vitally important.
Sean and Maura, do you have anything to add to the conversation around the equity and access?
That's a tough question. Yeah, I mean, because someone else had asked that before, and there are things we are trying to do with some of our work with community college to encourage students to go to the public library where there's access to things. But in reality, most of our application you can do online, but you need a smartphone, and we can't change that. It's just not reasonable. So we're doing things to encourage students to get to different areas. We've done some things at high school fairs where we bring our laptops with a hotspot and offer students a chance to log in and at least register for different things that we have, because we'll have the hotspot there, or use the high school's Wi-Fi, things like that. But if a student on their own can't get any access to a public library or a smartphone or anything, that I don't have a good solution for that, unfortunately.
Yeah, so we do have some workarounds in that sense. If the school alerts us, or if the student, you know, alerts us in terms of like the application piece, we're thinking about, you know, how do we go about, and I'll send you guys a great link, or maybe, I don't know if Erin can send it out in a follow-up, but McKinsey just put out an article for universities actually, that I read this morning, and it gave me some ideas just for programming in terms of the equity stuff. It started when I was watching the NFL draft the other night, and I turned to my boyfriend and I said, what happens like if some of these people, like their homes, like they're, you know, I mean, and it just dawned on me like, oh my goodness, that's going to happen with our own employees, right? Some students, they may not want people seeing the background of their home. They might be embarrassed by it. I was that kid growing up. I wouldn't want you guys to see the house I grew up in. And, you know, but we're encouraging everyone to use their videos, right, to be more social and engaging in our work environment. And so we have to be thinking about equity of our interns. And, you know, I mean, we just bought them all laptops. They're not Liberty devices. We just bought everyone laptops and MiFi hotspots for the summer. That was our way to solve for the technology crunch. And the fact that I didn't want to reach out, because if a kid said to me, sorry, you know, I don't own my own laptop, which many of them don't. A lot of the students get school devices. So we are having to think about that at every step. And I would just encourage you all to think about even the virtual engagement you're doing with your own staff and things like that. And, you know, making sure that people feel comfortable having stuff in their background even.
Great, super point. We are at the end of our time, unfortunately. And I want to thank everyone who joined us for today's town hall. It's been wonderful interacting with you. Sorry we couldn't get to everyone's questions. Thank you to our panelists. You did a marvelous job. There are many other resources you can find on the NACE website. I hope you'll take a look. There are there's a new poll that's going to come out next week that will be delivered to your inboxes to our members. Please take part in those. They're vitally important to your peers as they want to learn about what's happening in the field, and we will report back to all of you on that information. So again, thank you for joining us. The session will be recorded and will be available within 24 hours on the NACE website under the Corona resources. So hope you have a great rest of the day. Be well, be safe.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everyone.
This concludes today's event. The archive will be available within 3 business days. Thank you again for attending, and thank you to our sponsor, HireVue.